Our first speaker here in this session is Dr. Sangeeta Luthra. She's a Sikh, born and raised, is an anthropologist and educator. She has taught classes in cultural anthropology, gender studies, and cultural studies. Her research interests are women's development and empowerment, feminist theory, cultural politics of development, and most recently, Sikh American institution building in the post-9/11 period. Her writings on diasporic Sikhs have been featured in academic journals, Punjabi Sikh formations, and in online forums like sikhtik.com, Punjabi Beat Magazine, and sikhpoint.com. She is a contributing writer and member of the editorial board of Her Name is Paul, Sikh American women write for love, courage, and faith. Sangeeta ji volunteers her time in her community and in South Asian cultural associations. Sangeeta ji lives in Los Altos, California, with her husband and 2 daughters. She also heard her views today morning in the panel discussion that we have. She's uniquely qualified to speak on many of the social issues, and very grateful that she's participating in this conference. Feel honored to have her here. And the title of her talk is Disciple, Student, Scholar, the relationship of a Sikh with her Guru, Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So I request Sangeeta ji to come presentation.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you, Guruji, for the introduction. So I've had the opportunity to speak here on other topics in the past, and today I'm going to do a paradigm shift and make it much more personal. I wanted to talk about my relationship to Sri Guru Granth Sahib as a diasporic Sikh. I was born and raised in the United States, although I have lived in India for short periods of time. So this is a kind of my journey discussion, but I'm hoping that it's a journey that many of you or your children will be able to relate to. So my talk is Disciple, Student, Scholar, and I wanted to start by suggesting and highlighting some quotations about a Ghormach, suggesting that the concept of Ghormach embodies these 3 subject positions of a student, of a disciple first, then a student, and then a scholar. That is what the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, that's the journey that we should be trying to stay on as we engage with Gurbani and Gurmukhi. So, I looked up a number of different lines, quotations, to try to understand what is the definition of Gurmukh within the Guru Granth Sahib. So I'm going to go through a couple of them, and bear with me, and then I'll talk about other issues around how for people in the diaspora to engage with the Guru Granth Sahib. So in this party, the Shabad is Gurmukh Kirpa Kare Pagat Kije Bin Gur Pagat Na Hoye. And in this one, what I found, wanted to focus on was the notion of grace. That Guru di meher de bagair, Guru di grace de bagair, we can't really embark on this journey of Gurmukh, becoming or trying to be a Gurmukh. So that's the concept of disciple. That a disciple is one who is kind of submits to a teacher and through faith, purely through faith. The second new idea of Ghormach is the concept of student, and here we see this idea highlighted in the Bani, in this particular line from Gurbani, Guru Amar Das Ji di Bani, of a person who works hard, who's disciplined, and that's how we think of students. So in this Bani, E man alas kina karya Gurmukh naam te aaya. And in this Bani, it's asking us to put in the effort, the work that is required. So you need grace, but you also need to bring your effort and work to become a Gurmukh. And then the third element of Gurmukh is a little bit beyond student. To be a good scholar, you have to be a student. You have to have faith in the work you do, but it also requires a deeper form of reflection, critical analysis, contemplation. So, and in Gurbani again, there's this recognition of this other level of being Gurmukh, where you have Har Bhagat Har Ka Pyar Hai Je Gurmukh Kare Bichar. And in this, the translation reads, the Gurmukh reflects deeply and contemplates. So we see these nuanced meanings of Gurmukh and many other meanings of Gurmukh within Gurbani. What are some other traits of a Gurmukh? In another Shabad that I found, Karam Milei Sach Paya, Gurmukh Sada Nirod. And in this, it talks about the Gurmukh needing to have balanced restraint. That is, to obtain a connection to Vaheguru. And again, a very important characteristic. We talked about characteristics for leaders, but in order to be a good leader, you need to be a Gurmukh, and in order to be Gurmukh, you have to show this ability to be balanced and restraint. And I think that Inder Mohan Virji and Gurmastak Singh Ji, they kind of also really worked through this idea. Another important characteristic of Gurmukh is again the related concept of Haume. So Gurmukh Naam Salaya Haume Nivri Bha. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The Gurmukh praises the Naam and the fire of egotism is extinguished. So in order to be Gurmukh, you have to give up your preconceived knowledge and ideas so that you're open to receive the knowledge and wisdom of Gurbani. Just a couple more kind of interesting reflections on Gurmukh within Gurbani. Gurmukh must be self-aware. And here we see this in Har Jap Jare Chutiya Gurmukh Chine Aap, in which through chanting the name of the Lord, you shall come to understand your own self. Again, this notion of self-reflection, being self-aware, which Guru Mastak Singh Ji and Inder Mohan Ji also talked about. And then finally, we speak a lot about Gurmukh and being the Sikh, the experience of being a Sikh in relation to Naam, to the remembrance of Naam, to the remembrance of Vaheguru. But there is another element, which is our deeds. How does all this self-reflection reflect and shape the choices we make in the world? And in this particular line, Guru Amar Das Ji focuses on this idea, and he says, Gurmukh kar kamavani sach kat pargat hoy. And in this, the translation argues, the Gurmukh practices good deeds, and the truth is revealed in the heart. And here we have that wonderful element of Sikhi of Naam Japna, Kirt Karna, Vand Chakna. This Naam, contemplation, meditation, self-awareness, but also action in the world, doing good deeds, and being engaged with the world that's around us. So one of the issues that I'm really interested in talking about is how do Sikhs who live outside of Punjab, who have been born and raised outside of India and Punjab, how do they engage with Gurbani and with the Guru Granth Sahib, particularly if their language skills are not as good as a native speaker would be? And so that's what I'm going to make the rest of the talk about. And it's my journey as a diasporic Sikh. That is a Sikh who has lived most of her life outside of India and Punjab. So as other people have said today, this is a journey, and for me, recognizing that being a Sikh is a journey was actually very empowering. I grew up always feeling kind of inadequate because of my poor Punjabi skills and Gurbani skills. I mean, I've spent my life trying to learn more Gurbani and Gurmukhi, but I have always kind of had this, feeling of inadequacy. And so once I stopped thinking about it as a finish line that I have to cross, and started thinking about it as a journey, and thinking about learning about Gurbani through multiple tools and mediums, I felt a little less bad about myself. And I also felt that, I felt empowered, let's put it that way. I'm not trying to feel sorry for myself, but I felt I saw the journey in a different way. Once I stopped worrying about the finish line and just started thinking about the journey, all the tools in front of me and the ways and the spaces in which I can engage in Gurbani and Gurmukhi. So that's the autobiographical moment. So there are many modes of learning Gurbani and Gurmukhi that on reflection for this talk, I sat back and thought back on my earliest memories to today, and so that's what I'm going to walk you through. One mode of learning was what you can call participatory mode of learning, Gurmukhi and Gurbani. And this happened for me in all these different ways. It started with our tiny Sangat in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was about 30 people. We used to meet in people's homes, and the Sangat, the Divan was Sangat driven. In other words, that it was our parents and the children together. We would do all of the various prayers and ceremonies and traditions within the Divan, and so we were as Dr. I.J. Singh said, we were leaderless at that point in terms of our engagement with Gurmukhi and as a Sangat. So that was a very important moment. And your childhood moments are always the most precious ones, and luckily, for the most part, those memories are only very sweet and comforting moments. So that was one space. And then in that space, like I say here, it was without a Bhai Sahib or a Gyani Ji or a Kirtaniya, but we managed. And it was a very important participatory moment for us because we didn't have someone who we could kind of, outsource the job to. We had to do it ourselves. The other spaces of participatory engagement have been having the Sri Guru Granth Sahib in my home, in the home that I grew up in, and even watching my father, who, because of that generation, he did not read Gurmukhi. He only knew Persian. He didn't even know Hindi script. He knew English and Persian. So he had to learn Gurmukhi as an adult in order to also share in the responsibilities of Part. So having the Sri Guru Granth Sahib in the home was, of course, an important moment too. Just being there, watching my parents go through the motions, and also their emotional connection. They're relying on that space as a source of emotional and spiritual strength. The other really big part of my experience were Sikh youth camps, and I have a co-camper here. We attended Sikh youth camps together in Pittsburgh for many years, and in those spaces, that was special because it was very peer-driven. So we were all young children growing up in the United States on the East Coast, where the communities were very small. But through the camps, we were able to really learn together and help each other. And of course, the camps were also wonderful spaces for socialization. So it was Gurbani, Gurmukhi, culture, language, it just involved all of these things. And then the friendships and the networks that we were able to create, so that tiny Sangat of 30 people through the camps became a much bigger Sangat of 1,000 people across the couple of states around us. And so that was another very important space. And of course, others were conferences like this and conferences growing up. And then finally, Khalsa schools. And Khalsa schools really were more for my children who attended the Khalsa school here for a few years than for me, but they are an important space for what I would call participatory engagement. The second type of learning that I would like to kind of talk about a little bit is what I call contextual and experiential, sorry for the typo, experiential learning. And in this happened for me because my parents were very particular about making sure that our family visited us from India and that we visited them in India. So they made it a big effort we didn't go on vacations to Bermudas, but we did go to India to visit family a lot in Delhi and in other parts of India where my family was. So those visits to India, looking back, were a very important experiential form of learning for me, because what they did was they allowed me to see Sikhi in its native land and to see and feel what Gurdwara is like, going to Gurdwara in Delhi or going to Gurdwara in Amritsar or in Punjab, how that compared to the Gurdwara experience here. But it just being there, you know, the sights, the sounds, the way people moved and interacted, all things which were not openly spoken about, but which you saw and experienced, and, you know, the mannerisms and the dress and the smells and everything. There was something about that I found, looking back, you know, really, really helped me to understand the kind of cultural and social context of the tradition that we are so lucky to have inherited. Of course, also, the other experiential examples are grandparents coming to visit us, grandparents coming to visit my children and their connections to their grandparents, and visits to, when I got a little bit older, I was lucky enough to spend 6 weeks with this group of Sikh students in India in 1980 or 81, and we spent 3 weeks traveling around Punjab and visiting all the historical gurdwaras, and we traveled to Jammu Kashmir, and so I was a little older and was engaging with it in different ways. But again, every time I visit and have spent time, it has kind of given me a kind of background, social and cultural knowledge with which to understand some of the references that are in Gurbani, which are really rooted in the culture and the traditions of that part of the country. And then finally, another really important mode for me of engaging Gurmukhi and Gurbani has been as a parent and trying to help my children connect with Gurbani and Gurmukhi and make it feel like something, you know, that has relevance in their lives and that will give them strength and resilience to face, you know, life's challenges. So, and, you know, as a parent, again, some of the same things that I did, my children have done, being part of Sangats and Gurdwaras and other Sikh spaces in this area. We have a program called Vaisakhi Raat, and so both of my daughters did that for many years. And even though it's a cultural program, it created a space in which they could feel bonded with other Sikh children and have, you know, a sense of connectiveness. And then finally, I think the other really important one was, I think that this generation of the current young generation, the millennial generation, if you will, and I think you saw that in the discussions by Guneet Kaur and Jujar Singh this morning, they are interested in activism and seva and charity. And so for them, Sikhi comes alive in those opportunities and in those spaces. And in the young woman who spoke from UC Santa Cruz, who talked about the Sikh Students Association and the ways in which now many of these young people are in college finding and creating spaces to help each other learn by having kirtan nights or Gurbani sessions together. And so this peer-based learning is very important. It gives you hausla, it gives you a sense of support. So these are the modes of learning, and I just kind of wanted to go through that because sometimes we think of Gurbani and Gurmukhi as something only based in the Gurdwara or only when you are actually sitting down and doing Path. And we want to broaden that a bit so that people are engaging with it mind, body, and soul kind of thing. And that kind of learning is much more intuitive and deep and resilient. It stays with you for a long time. The final thing I wanted to talk about was a very important phenomenon that other people have alluded to, and then we have a leader in this area with us, Gurmastak Singh. I mean, your work in developing SikhNet a concept by a Sikh scholar out of England who wrote a paper called The Guru Online. And I thought that was a beautiful idea, a beautiful metaphor, because many of us do use the resources that are now available in this virtual community and world that we have. And, so it's very good, and it has opened up a lot of spaces for Sikhs who live all over the world. And there are many, many Sikhs around the world now who are diasporic. And that means living outside of India, and they are all finding ways to engage with Gurbani, interesting ways, new ways, but that don't necessarily get away from the core beliefs. So what we have over the last 15 years is this engagement with the Guru Online, and there are many, many types of the ways to engage with the Guru Online, and I'm not saying they're all great. They do have some downsides to them, as does life online more broadly have downsides, but they do offer some interesting, useful tools for us. So this is just a list of some of the various sources that you can use to learn about Gurbani, to learn Gurmukhi, to learn more about Gur Shabad. And all the quotes that I used today are from that top source, siddhigranth.org. But there are many, many different spaces in which you can, and online that you can use tools, in other words. So what are the advantages of the online environment? And here I'm again drawing on Dr. Jasjit Singh's paper about the Guru Online. He actually did a whole set of surveys to understand why people use these online tools to engage with Sikhi and with Gurbani. And so he got a lot of interesting responses to that. So the most obvious one, obviously, is easy access to Gurbani, to the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, and to translations. One of the things that Jasjit Singh found was that the online forums allow for open discussions, a little bit more open discussions about problems that may exist in the community or between communities. And and this is true about online engagement generally, but because, especially among young people who would be afraid to talk about certain issues, maybe in front of their parents or their parents' peers, but they won't be afraid to address these issues online. There's that level of anonymity a little bit that goes with it. So he found that some of the discussions that these young people in England were talking about were questions in the community, the ability to talk about taboo topics like dating and marriage, issues in Gurdwara management, domestic violence, caste issues, and even he found websites that were devoted to LGBTQ Sikhs, in other words, Sikhs who identify as gay or lesbian or transgender, these things. So, there are people in our community who may be experiencing all of these different things, which are very difficult to talk about face to face, but they bring them closer, give them a sense that they have a connection to the community. And this is important because we want to be a community like other people have talked about that is welcoming and recognizes even the diversity within our community, where there are Sikhs in Malaysia, there are Sikhs all over the communities all over the world, and each one of them is adapting to their unique environment. That doesn't mean that they're giving up core principles, but they're adapting. There are Sikhs who have been away from India for 3-4 generations, and yet they still have that identification. But as a community, how do we be open-minded and embrace those people? And the online environment has allowed for that to some extent. Some of the disadvantages are, there's a potential for partial information or sometimes maybe inaccurate information. And so we as online consumers, which is true, we've been hearing all about fake news. We have to be very, very savvy in the way that we use online tools. Sometimes translations of Gurbani and the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, according to Jasjit Singh, many of the translations now, especially English translations online, and he actually did a kind of analysis of this, are coming from a very, very narrow number of sources. So we have 1 or 2 sources which are providing the bulk of the translations which are being used by millions of Sikhs around the world now. So that is an issue. We want to have a diversity of translations. This is something that he talked about also, because we want to have, different interpretations, more nuanced understanding of the translation from Gurmukhi, Gurbani, from the various languages in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib into English, so that we don't lose the nuance, the deeper ideas, the more difficult concepts. We don't lose those in translation. So translation is an issue where there's a lot of room for improvement. I do know that there are efforts by different Sikh scholars to try to work on translations and keep updating translations so that we have translations which are as close to the original meanings that we can get, and that involve a description of the metaphors that the gurus were using, metaphors which were rooted in a very specific cultural and social milieu. So translation is a question, and we have to ask ourselves, is the information we're getting, is it high quality, is it accurate? And again, I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, we shouldn't throw out the online experience for fear of these issues. We should just support people who are trying to make it better and better. And that's just my point here also, that translation as well as exegesis, that is the explanation of this very deep and complex philosophy that is within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib. And how do we support this? And I recently had the opportunity to speak to a few people who self-identify as Bhai Sabs and Kirtaniya. And one of the things that they talked about was a need for professional development and a need for the community to really support these people who are playing a very big role in terms of managing our gurdwaras and who often are really our go-to advisors. And how do we help them become better versions of themselves? How do we give them the respect and support and the encouragement to improve their own ability to be good guides to those of us who need the guides through this journey of learning about Gurmukhi and the Sri Guru Granth. And then finally, so I started off being very self-apologetic as a diasporic Sikh, but as I worked through preparing for this talk, I realized at the end of it that, being a migrant is not always a disadvantage. And it reminded me of something when I used to visit my family in India, all Sikhs, and they all grew up in India. They speak wonderful Punjabi or Hindi, or they can certainly understand Gurbani, Gurmukhi better than me. But they used to laugh. They used to say, "You're so obsessed with this. you're so interested in this. We never go to the Gurdwara. Asi do bari jande ne Vaisakhi te Guru Nanak Dev Ji de Gurpurab, and people take it for granted. And they said, you don't take this for granted. You have this desire, and it's a desire out of need, right? Out of circumstance. So there is sometimes it's good to be the outsider looking in, as I think other people have pointed out, that it gives you a greater thirst, a greater desire to, understand and become hopefully someday Ghormach. Thank you. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Sangeeta ji, thank you very much for very, very comprehensive picture on the journey of a diasporic youth and growing up into a real Gursikh. Thank you very much. It was a very comprehensive talk. I have some questions here from the audience, and before that I take on those, I have one question. I often face myself here dealing with the children. What's the best way to interest the younger people into religion? I mean, you have taught here many ways, but if you were to prioritize, what would you say then? What would be the best way to do it?
I think, I do think that seva is one of the best. Because I think giving children the opportunity for seva, because it is interactive,
yes,
if you show how important seva is to the community, not just seva for ourselves also, but, working at a soup kitchen or any kind of seva, I think, again, I do think especially this generation of young people coming up, they want to solve problems in the world. And I think showing the connections between, also talking about what we did in the panel this morning, our gurus were men of action. They even Guru Nanak Dev Ji, who was such a profound philosopher and such an amazing mind, and just in terms of his vision and understanding, but he didn't wait. He spent his life traveling, going through hardship. He could have easily sat in his village and had people come to him, but that wasn't his choice. His choice was to go out to where people are and be a person of action as well as, contemplation. And that balance, I think the contemplation side is harder for younger children, but over time, they do come back to it if they understand the core values. Because those core values are things that we can all, the golden rule, right? We can, across many cultures, those values exist. So that's my perspective. I also think, make it fun, sometimes we did fart in the car. It was, it doesn't have to be sitting in a place. It can be doing things in unusual spaces. I think maybe that helps. I don't know.
Thank you.
I'm sure people in the audience must have a lot of interesting suggestions for that.
Yeah, we definitely are open to suggestions as to how to invest younger people more into the Sikh faith. So if anybody in the audience has suggestions, please speak up.
Not treating them as kids, but treating them as adults, and really embracing the concept that we can learn as much from them as they from us. Trying to walk in their shoes, so when they come to the class, the first and the most important thing is a welcome song that we sing for everybody. And initially it used to lead to a lot of giggles, but eventually when they hear their name, and they hear everybody saying Vaheguru and Jaya to them after their name, their face lights up. And just that act of acknowledging them by their name and welcoming them to that day in school is priceless. It sets the tone for engagement in the class. I also our generation. And we, us connect with them, not to expect them to connect with us. Or we can
I agree.
here it is for them to start trying.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is the question, I think you have answered it, but I'll read it anyway. What is coming? Online community instead of camps? How do we do seva when not physically present? Just by donations? I think you have said that this is just one of the channels being online, and there are.
I think camps are very important also, or any kind of regular peer-based interaction. You know, whether it's a camp or a Khalsa school, or you know, for us it was Visakirat, caring for Visakirat. I think that that need to connect with people face to face. I'm an anthropologist, so I like human interaction. But I think it's still very, very important. So I think, you know, I think these are, use what makes sense at that moment and what's available to you. And I think the other thing is, don't have regrets. Do the best you can and keep going. Because regret is the one thing that stops you from keeping going. And so, you know, if that's probably...
Here's an interesting question. We always talk about 3 golden rules that Guru Nanak Dev Ji taught us. Kirt karna, naam japna, van chakna. Question is there a right order in which you should place these? Kirt karna, naam japna, van chakna? Or, or is there any thoughts on this?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe I'm also... I think that they're all important. You can also japna bhi ho sakta, kirtana bhi ho sakta. I mean, I think that you can do them together. And yeah.
I think I tend to differ with you. Let me give you my logic. You know, apna tanne bhagat ne kya na bhukhe bhagat na kije, je mala apni dije. I think the kirt comes first, and then you have something to support yourself. Okay. Sure, I agree with you. Okay, in that context, yes, that's correct. I think Sardar, I just
have the mic.
Tusi stage te aa jao.
And I have the mic. So while he's coming up, Sangeeta, I wanted to say as a fellow camper that I have found that the Hemkund competition, which has really expanded, you know, Kirtan now and international level competitions, when we had it in Sacramento, when we had the international last year, we had a whole different audience of kids from very, very young, very engaged. And the other thing is, Vicky's here, Sikh Lens has been incredible. You can get kids to make movies, to show Sikhi from a very completely different perspective you would have never thought of. And that's another way to engage the youth.
Great, thank you.
A very brief comment, less than a sentence, that Kirt Karana, Vand Chakana are social constructs. Naam Japna is a different variety.
Sure.
Which one do you want to put first? That's a different matter.
You can come here.
I think that was too simple question. I shouldn't have raised it. People can work out with the real question I have prompted me after you showed this slide, the advantages and disadvantages of migration from Punjab impacting Gurbani. I think the main disadvantage as I see it is that for a very long time, the immigrant younger generations won't be able to read Gurmukhi properly. And unless they read Gurmukhi properly, they would never ever be able to understand the Gurbani. As you mentioned, there are a lot of very sincere online websites which are trying to educate and spread the the awareness. But I think many of them are really just misdirecting, spreading misunderstanding, including in this Gurudwara. There is a very popular, I don't know which site has produced the Roman spellings of the Gurbani. When the Shabd is being recited by the Kirtanis, they sing it in Punjabi, of course, and then on the display boards it's written in Roman, and the spellings are so terrible and so misguided that if you do not understand Gurmukhi, or if you haven't read in Gurmukhi, or are totally unaware of it, then it could totally mislead you. For example, and there are very minor things which they can do it, like when they say pao, they say pao. They say papenal pao, which is very easy to correct it with BH, pao. The pao and pao, which, besides giving so many examples, but I think these things are doing more disservice than to educate people. That was my...
I think... Sure, please.
I mean,
Meeting.
I can give you one example. So growing up, we didn't have any online when I was a student. And in college, my favorite part, because I did this a lot with my Dadaji in India, was Rerasa part. So I used to, my way of learning Rerasa part was I had an audio cassette and a gutka. And I listened to the audio and I would read the gutka. And that helped me a lot to, work on pronunciation as well as understanding and learn the parts. So it was my little way of trying to start to figure out how to really learn it properly. I know that when I speak Punjabi, I'm sure I have an horrible accent and everything, but it still helped me. But you're right, and I mean, again, I feel that we can always improve, and and we have to, it's now, these tools are accessible to anybody and everyone. So if you can produce something better, or you can support people who are trying to produce something better, and in good faith, we should remember that whoever is putting these things up is doing it as a form of seva for the community. This is not malicious for the most part. So we should do it in good faith, and I'm sure that these things will evolve and improve. But I mean, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਪਤਾ ਹੋਏਗਾ, and I'm sure that it can be improved.
The issue of transliteration, and this is transliteration, is more complex than that. And I'll give you a simple example. The Asa di Var Padde Rose, Itte Chanan Hundia Gur bin Kor Andar. Gur bin Kor Andar. No, not Guru bin Kor Andar. Is that a meaningful difference? It could be. Guru is Guru, and Gur in Punjabi translated is a technique. Is that right? Guru is a technique. So meaningfully, it doesn't matter in the reading of that verse. However, why was Guru not used and Guru used would be a meaningful difference. I don't know what the Guru had in mind. That's one thing. Two, don't forget he's writing poetry. The needs of poetry sometimes make such changes necessary. So which one is right? It depends if you stronger or I. And I have no opinion. Right? So it doesn't matter again. You've got to be sensitive to the needs of...
I think I will stop this discussion here. Thank you very much, everyone, for participation.